16-year-old Jason Miller thought the roar of his souped-up engine would drown out his problems, but when his little brother Evan's terrified cries for their mom echoed through the car during a midnight police chase, the city of Westbrook realized this wasn't just another street race. It was a desperate cry for help that would end on a steel bridge with the world watching. The night had settled over Westbrook like a heavy blanket, muffling the usual sounds of the city. Street lights flickered along the empty avenues, casting long shadows on cracked sidewalks. Most residents were asleep, unaware that the stillness of the night was about to be shattered. A low hum started far off in the distance, barely noticeable at first, but growing louder with every passing second. It was the unmistakable sound of a high-performance engine tuned and modified for speed. The car appeared around the corner like a phantom, headlights cutting through the darkness, reflecting off wet asphalt from an earlier drizzle. Neon underglow bathed the street in shades of electric blue and green, drawing the eyes of anyone unfortunate enough to be outside. The driver was a young man barely out of his teens, his hands tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. He had been racing on these streets for months, carving a name for himself in the underground scene. Speed was his addiction, and control was his obsession. Every turn, every acceleration, every near misfed an adrenaline high that nothing else could match. On any other night, this would have been another thrilling race, another story whispered among street racing circles. But tonight, there was a tension in the air that even he couldn't shake. The way the engine growled felt different, the way the tires gripped the wet road seemed sharper. He was chasing something, but he didn't know what. The city itself seemed to hold its breath as he weaved through intersections, narrowly avoiding parked cars, edging past pedestrians who had stepped out to investigate the roaring engine. Cameras mounted on buildings captured the streaking vehicle, recording a blur of color and light that would later shock the city. Streetlights flickered in rapid succession as the car accelerated, leaving streaks of reflection across puddles in the asphalt. There was a rhythm to the chase, a heartbeat that matched his own racing pulse. Every instinct screamed to go faster, to push further, but deep inside, there was a flicker of fear, subtle but persistent, gnawing at the edges of his confidence. He passed familiar landmarks, neon signs of diners and shops lighting his path, their glow bouncing off the polished metal of his car. The engine's roar echoed against brick walls, reverberating like a warning. This was more than a thrill ride now. It was a test, a challenge with unknown stakes. He glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting the usual emptiness of the quiet streets, but the sudden reflection of flashing lights made his stomach drop. At that moment, he realized that the night's excitement was about to turn into something far more dangerous. Every decision he made from here on would matter. The car hugged corners with precision, tires squealing as if the vehicle itself was alive and aware of the risks. He leaned into each turn, eyes scanning the darkened streets for obstacles, for anyone who might stand in his way. The thrill of speed mixed with a growing sense of dread, creating a tension that was almost unbearable. Passers-by who glimpsed him felt a mix of awe and fear, the kind of fear that comes from witnessing something beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The young driver wasn't just racing the streets, he was racing his own limit, his own fears, and the night itself seemed to stretch endlessly before him. By the time he reached the edge of the city, the hum of the engine had transformed into a full-throated roar. The wind whipped past, carrying the smell of burning rubber and rain-soaked asphalt. Neon lights blurred into streaks, and the empty streets became a stage for a dangerous ballet of speed and skill. Every heartbeat matched the rhythm of the engine, every thought focused on the next move. The thrill of the race was undeniable, intoxicating, but lurking beneath it was a subtle unease, a feeling that tonight would not end like the others. Something unseen was waiting, ready to turn a night of exhilaration into a nightmare. The flashing blue and red lights cut through the darkness, piercing the stillness of the city like a warning flare. The young racer's stomach twisted as the sound of sirens rose behind him, echoing off the narrow streets. It wasn't the first time police had noticed him, but this was different. Tonight, they weren't just catching a glimpse of his car disappearing into the distance, they were locked onto him, determined to bring the chase to an end. For the first time, the thrill of racing clashed with the reality of being hunted. His hands tightened on the wheel, sweat forming across his forehead as he pushed the accelerator to the floor. The car responded instantly, surging forward with raw power. Asphalt blurred beneath him, lights streaked past his vision, and every turn became a gamble, yet the sirens grew louder, closer, refusing to fade into the background. Police units coordinated through radios, their vehicles spreading out like predators cornering prey. The chase had drawn them deeper into the heart of Westbrook, through residential blocks where porch lights flickered on as startled families peered from behind curtains. Tires screeched against the pavement, dogs barked in alarm, and the once quiet streets turned into a stage for chaos. Every intersection carried danger. He blasted through red lights, narrowly missing late-night drivers who slammed on their brakes in shock. At one crossing, a delivery truck froze in the middle of the road as his car veered sharply around it, the rear tire skidding within inches of disaster. The cameras mounted at these corners captured everything, broadcasting a blur of high-speed recklessness across security feeds that police would later review. Each frame revealed a young driver fighting not just to stay ahead, but to stay alive. The police pressed harder, deploying spike strips at key roads, trying to funnel him into a trap. But the racer's knowledge of backstreets and alleys gave him an advantage. He darted into a narrow lane, his car's side mirror scraping against brick walls, sparks flying as the metal ground against stone. Behind him, larger police cruisers struggled to follow, tires screeching as they tried to maneuver into the same tight passage. For a brief moment, he felt he could slip away, the city's labyrinth of shortcuts becoming his only ally, but luck didn't hold. As he burst out of the alley, the racer nearly collided with a cyclist who had been pedaling home from work. The man threw himself to the ground, narrowly avoiding the car's front bumper. The racer's heart leapt into his throat, his mind flooded with the realization of how close he had come to ending a life. His grip tightened, eyes darting between the road ahead and the mirror where flashing lights refused to disappear. The fear creeping into his chest grew heavier, stronger than the adrenaline that had fueled him so far. The police chase stretched on minute after minute, sirens slicing through the night air, horns blaring as officers shouted commands into radios. The city was no longer asleep, it was awake, watching, and holding its breath. Helicopters were dispatched, their spotlights sweeping across rooftops and intersections, casting ghostly beams that searched for his every move. The racer's secret world of midnight races was gone. Now, the entire city knew his name, his car, and his trail of destruction. The night that began with the roar of an engine was turning into a nightmare he couldn't control, and no matter how fast he drove, the flashing lights only drew closer. As the chase tore through the streets, a shocking detail emerged that shifted everything. The police had managed to get a clear view through traffic cameras and dash-mounted lenses, and what they saw stunned even the most seasoned officers. The driver behind the wheel was not some hardened criminal or experienced racer in his 20s. It was a boy barely 16 years old. His youthful face, pale under the glow of passing streetlights, betrayed both fear and stubborn determination. He was gripping the wheel with all the strength his hands could muster, eyes darting wildly between the road ahead and the chaos unfolding in his rearview mirror. But what truly sent a wave of disbelief through everyone watching wasn't just his age. It was the sight of a passenger seat that wasn't empty. Strapped in beside him was a much smaller child, no older than 7 or 8. The boy's younger sibling sat wide-eyed, his small body trembling with every screech of the tires and jolt of the car. The city's cameras caught glimpses of him pressing himself into the seat, clutching the belt across his chest as tears ran down his cheeks. He was frightened, overwhelmed, and calling out for the only person he trusted to make sense of the madness, their mother. Those cries weren't muffled by the roar of the engine. They rang out clearly in the recordings, chilling everyone who later listened. The discovery of the passenger changed the pursuit entirely. Officers had been treating it as a reckless joyride, another case of a teen pushing limits. Now the stakes were higher. The life of a child was hanging in the balance. Each maneuver by the driver carried new weight. Every sharp turn risked more than his own safety. The police adjusted their tactics, pulling back slightly, radioing updates with urgency, weighing the danger of pressing too hard against the risk of letting the situation spin further out of control. Inside the car, the older brother's desperation was growing. His knuckles whitened as he fought to maintain control, speeding through intersections with an intensity far beyond his years. His chest rose and fell quickly, his breath shallow and uneven. For all his confidence in driving, the reality of his decision was beginning to crush him. He wasn't just fleeing officers. He was fleeing responsibility, fear, and whatever storm had driven him onto the streets with his sibling in tow. The cries from the passenger seat cut through the noise, each one a reminder of the fragile life depending on his choices. Those cries reached more than just him. They reached the officers trailing behind, officers who now hesitated before attempting dangerous maneuvers. They reached the city itself as news stations began to intercept the feeds and broadcast snippets of the chase live. The words carried a heartbreaking weight, reminding everyone that this was not merely a spectacle of speed and law enforcement, it was a moment of human fragility unfolding in real time. Viewers watching from their homes weren't seeing an outlaw-defying police. They were seeing a frightened boy carrying an even more frightened child, spiraling deeper into danger. The chase was no longer about catching a racer. It was about saving two children who should never have been on that road in the first place. The city, the police, and anyone watching could sense that the story was building towards something unpredictable, something that would leave a mark on everyone involved. The cries for a mother lingered in the night air, cutting through the roar of engines, reminding the world of just how young and vulnerable the faces behind the windshield really were. The pursuit surged toward the city's industrial edge, where the streets narrowed and the glow of downtown lights gave way to shadows cast by old warehouses and rusting cranes. The racer's car sped recklessly past abandoned factories, its headlights sweeping across broken windows and graffiti-stained walls. The police convoy followed closely, sirens bouncing off metal structures and echoing into the night. Up ahead loomed the old steel bridge, a relic from another era, its skeletal frame rising against the skyline like a silent sentinel. It was a place many avoided after dark, but on this night it became the final stretch of a desperate chase. The bridge stretched over a wide river, black water rushing beneath, currents strong enough to sweep away anything that fell in. As the car roared onto its worn surface, the steel beams vibrated under the weight. Tires screeched, sparks flicked up from the gray-red surface, and the echoes of the engine rang like thunder across the water. Police cruisers flanked the bridge from both ends, forming a blockade that shimmered under the flashing lights. The racer slammed his brakes, the car skidding sideways before halting in a haze of smoke and burning rubber. For the first time since the chase began, the vehicle stood still. Inside, the tension was unbearable. The younger child clutched the seat belt so tightly his fingers trembled, his cries breaking into sobs. The older boy's chest heaved as he stared at the glowing lights reflecting off the windshield. His eyes darted wildly between the barriers ahead and the approaching officers behind. Trapped, with nowhere to run, he seemed to teeter on the edge of breaking. The bravado that had carried him through the streets drained away, leaving behind a raw fear that was impossible to hide. Officers emerged cautiously from their vehicles, hands raised to signal restraint. Their radios crackled with updates, voices steady but urgent. They had no room for mistakes. One wrong move, one sudden lurch of the car, could send the vehicle careening off the edge into the river below. Negotiators called for patience, urging restraint, aware that this was not just about catching a runaway driver, it was about preventing a tragedy that would haunt the city forever. Then came the twist no one had expected. As investigators pieced together details in real time, they discovered that this wasn't a simple act of teenage rebellion. The boy had taken his sibling during a heated family dispute, running from the turmoil that had consumed their home. It wasn't about racing, not truly. The flashing lights and roaring engine had been his misguided escape, a desperate attempt to protect his brother from what he saw as a collapsing world around them. The truth struck harder than the chase itself. Those who had cheered at the spectacle fell silent as the reality sank in. The image of a reckless street racer was replaced by that of a scared teenager clutching the wheel not for glory but for survival. The cries of the younger child echoed over the bridge, mixing with the rush of the river below and the blare of sirens above. Underneath it all was the haunting sense that this wasn't a story of rebellion or defiance, but of desperation and the fragile line between fear and catastrophe. The standoff on the bridge ended without the violence many feared. Officers moved slowly, their words carried on radios and megaphones, urging calm as the young driver sat frozen behind the wheel. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, until finally the car door creaked open. The boy stepped out, shoulders slumped, his face streaked with sweat and tears. Behind him, the smaller child remained seated, eyes wide, still calling out for their mother with a shaky, broken voice. Officers rushed forward, careful and deliberate, lifting the child from the seat and wrapping a blanket around his trembling body. Relief rippled through the night air, a silent exhale shared by everyone watching. The two brothers were reunited with their mother soon after, an embrace captured by news cameras that had gathered near the bridge. The sight of her clutching both children against her chest became the image replayed on every television and phone screen the next morning. For the public, it was the ending they had been waiting for, though the story behind it was only just beginning to unfold. Questions lingered about how such a young boy could find himself at the center of a high-speed chase, and what desperation had driven him to drag his sibling into danger. Legal consequences came quickly. The 16-year-old faced charges that carried weight far beyond his years: reckless endangerment, unlawful fleeing, and child endangerment among them. Yet, when he stood before the court, he was not treated like a hardened criminal. He was seen as a child who had made reckless choices in the shadow of circumstances bigger than himself. The custody battles at home, the arguments overheard in the night, and the fear of losing his younger brother had all combined into a storm he didn't know how to weather. His solution had been misguided and dangerous, but it was born not from malice but from fear. The city of Westbrook didn't forget the chase. Video clips circulated online for weeks, replaying the cries for mom and the flashing lights on the steel bridge. For many, it was a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how quickly life can spiral when choices are made in panic. For others, it was a rallying point. Community leaders and youth organizations stepped forward, calling for more support for vulnerable teenagers caught in difficult family situations. Programs were launched that offered mentorship, counseling, and safer outlets for kids who might otherwise turn to the streets in search of control or escape. In the months that followed, the boy's life shifted in ways he could never have imagined that night behind the wheel. His car was gone, his freedom restricted, yet what remained was a chance at redemption, surrounded by guidance he once lacked. He began to see the chase not as his defining moment, but as the turning point where his life could take a different path. The younger sibling, though scarred by the memory of flashing lights and roaring engines, held tightly to the bond with his brother, a bond that had been tested but not broken. The story lived on in Westbrook as more than just another crime. It became a reminder that beneath the headlines and sirens are human lives, fragile and complicated, capable of mistakes but also of change. The memory of the steel bridge, the wailing sirens, and the haunting cries for a mother's embrace stayed etched in the city's history, not as a tale of glory or defiance, but as a lesson in fear, love, and the thin line between disaster and redemption.